What if one rematch didn't just erase a painful loss, but shattered 12 WNBA records in the process? After Portland embarrassed Caitlin Clark in their first meeting, many believed they had found the blueprint to stop Indiana. But when the Fever got their second chance, everything changed. Caitlin Clark didn't just bounce back, she led one of the most dominant performances of the season as Indiana rewrote the record books and proved they had learned from every mistake. But what happened in the rematch told a completely different story, because on July 31st, Indiana did not just beat Portland. They came back and tore the game open, and by the final buzzer, this was no longer about one revenge game. It was about a team that had learned exactly what broke the first time, fixed it, and turned the rematch into a statement. That is what made this night so important, not just the triple-double, not just the scoring, not just the records, the control. Because the biggest difference between the first meeting and the second one was not emotion, it was structure. Let's go back to that first game. Indiana actually opened well. They jumped out early. But then the foul trouble started piling up around Clark and everything changed. She sat when she should not have had to sit. The rotations got messy. The offense lost its organizer. And once Portland felt the game slipping toward its style, Indiana never really found its way back. That is the kind of loss that sticks with a team, not only because you lost, but because you can feel exactly how it happened. And for Stephanie White, that was the key. The answer was not just play harder next time. The answer was cleaner than that. Defend without fouling, keep the rotation tighter, keep Clark and Aliyah Boston on the floor together as much as possible, and stop giving the game away in the exact places Portland wanted to attack. That is what made the rematch so different from the opening tip. You could feel Indiana was not walking into the same trap twice. Clark was aggressive without looking rushed, the offense was organized, the flow looked cleaner, and most importantly, the Fever never let the game become one of those nights where their best player is sitting while everybody else is scrambling. That changes everything. Because when Clark is on the floor and in rhythm, Indiana becomes a completely different team, and that is exactly what Portland saw in the rematch. Clark finished with 26 points, 10 rebounds, and 10 assists, a triple-double, and not one of those quiet triple-doubles where you look down afterward and realize the numbers piled up by accident. This one felt loud. Every part of it mattered. The scoring mattered because Portland had previously managed to shut her all the way down. The rebounding mattered because it showed she was involved in every layer of the game. And the assists mattered because once Clark is controlling tempo and creating for others, Indiana becomes much more difficult to guard honestly. That is what triple-doubles like this really show, not just talent, command. Clark was not surviving this game, she was shaping it, and that is the part that should worry every team watching, because the first Portland game suggested there might be a physical blueprint for disrupting Indiana. The second game suggested the blueprint has a short shelf life if the Fever are disciplined and prepared, but Clark was not the whole story. That is what makes this win more important than a lot of highlight recaps will admit, because Indiana did not win this game through one superstar solo act. They won it with balance. 6 different players finished in double figures. That matters. When a team gets that kind of spread, the defense runs out of clean answers. If you overload on Clark, someone else beats you. If you shade too much attention toward the perimeter, Boston gets cleaner interior looks. If you focus too heavily on stopping the first action, Indiana's ball movement finds the second and third option. That is what the Fever are starting to look like now, not just explosive, connected. Aliyah Boston is a huge reason for that because Clark gets the biggest attention, but Boston gives Indiana structure. She settles possessions. She gives them an interior anchor. She makes the offense feel less frantic because there is always a reliable touch point inside. And when Clark and Boston are on the floor together for long stretches, the team looks much harder to break. That pairing is becoming one of the real engines of Indiana's season, and then you add in the other pieces, the floor spacing, the extra scoring, the willingness to run, the confidence to keep pushing, even after a strong start. That is when this team stops looking like a fun story and starts looking like a real problem. Because in the first Portland game, Indiana looked young. In the second one, they looked coached. That is a big difference. Young teams often lose the same way twice. They get hit with something once, talk about it, and then fall right into it again. Indiana did not do that here. They came back with a cleaner plan, a better rhythm, and a much better understanding of where the game could slip away if they were careless. And that is why this win matters beyond one night. Because it says this team is learning. And learning teams become dangerous fast when they already have high-end talent. Now, let's get to the record side of it. Because yes, this game also piled up numbers that will get replayed for a long time. Clark's triple-double alone is headline material. The scoring spread across the roster matters, the pace matters, the efficiency matters, but the most important number may not even be a single stat. It may be the 6 players in double figures. That is the number that tells you this team is starting to diversify its threat level. One-player teams are easy to describe. You stop the star, you stop the system. Balanced teams are different. Balanced teams force you to pick your poison. Balanced teams survive foul trouble better. Balanced teams survive cold stretches better. Balanced teams can absorb a weird whistle, a turnover run, or a rough quarter and still not collapse. That is what Indiana is trying to become. And this game against Portland looked like one of the clearest signs yet that they are getting there. But there was another reason this win stood out. It was not just Caitlin Clark putting up another historic stat line. It was the way Indiana responded as a team. Every time Portland tried to build momentum, the Fever answered. The ball kept moving. The defense stayed disciplined. And different players stepped up when it mattered. That is what separates a good performance from a dangerous team. Opponents can spend all week trying to slow Caitlin Clark, but when 6 players finish in double figures, there simply is no easy answer. That balance is what makes Indiana look far more complete than they did earlier in the season. They are no longer relying on one superstar to save every possession. They are learning how to win together. So when you zoom out, this game was about a lot more than revenge. It was about correction. Portland made Clark uncomfortable the first time. Indiana let the game get away from them. The rotation slipped. The whistles changed the flow, and the Fever never recovered. This time, they came back with answers. They protected the structure. They kept the key pieces on the floor. They got Clark into rhythm. They kept Boston involved. They got production across the roster. And when the momentum swung their way, they did not give it back. That is not luck. That is growth. And growth is the part that matters most if you are Indiana. Because everybody already knew Caitlin Clark could put up numbers. Everybody already knew she could take over stretches. Everybody already knew she could create highlights. The more important question was whether Indiana could become the kind of team that punishes opponents for overcommitting to her. This game said yes. That is why Portland beat Caitlin Clark once, then this happened is actually the right way to frame it. Because this was not about one player getting personal revenge, it was about a team solving a problem. And when good teams start solving problems instead of repeating them, that is when the season changes. Portland may have thought they found something in that first meeting, a way to throw Indiana off balance, a way to drag Clark into foul trouble and force the Fever into confusion. But the rematch showed that Indiana had already learned from it, and if they are learning this quickly, then teams that beat them once are going to have a much harder time doing it the same way again. That is what should stand out from this game, not just the triple-double, not just the records, not just the scoring, the evolution. This version of the Fever looks more poised, more layered, more connected, and a lot less fragile than the one Portland saw the first time. That is why this win feels bigger than one line in the standings, because when a team remembers exactly how it got exposed, comes back 2 months later, and completely flips the script, that says a lot about who they are becoming. And right now, Indiana looks like a team that is becoming something very real.